I really don't understand why housing associations don't have better PR. Because the things that they do that for communities that they operate in are fantastic. And you only ever read about them when something goes wrong. So I just kind of wish that people would understand what they do and the value they bring to communities much more.
Hello and welcome to Property Perspectives, a NatWest podcast all about sustainability. I'm Ashley Ty, I'll be your host today. I'm joined by Clare Miller, CEO, Clarion Housing Group, and Paul Eyre, Head of Housing at NatWest. Thank you very much. So let's get into it. Clare, if we could start with you. So having been through some of your stuff, you've got an aspiration to be net zero by 2050. And I think you've organised them into three kind of distinct pillars. It'd be really interesting just to hear about the journey that you've taken to kind of set that goal and how you've gone about organising the business around that.
Of course. So, I mean, we're a long-term business. We've been around for about 125 years. And I know you have seen some of our properties, which are almost that old. For us, investing in our homes and meeting the government's ambitions around net zero carbon is really important because it makes a huge difference to our residents. We want to have homes that are habitable, that are cheap to heat and are fit for purpose for today, not for when they were built, maybe 100 years ago. So 2050 is a natural fit with our business model. There's lots of challenges, of course, in getting to 2050, but I'm sure we'll get into that.
Absolutely. So we walked around the Sutton estate earlier, and thank you for that. Some great work you're doing down there. So when you were thinking about that estate and bringing it up to kind of not only present day, but I think we're talking about future proofing for up to 50 years. What were the main challenges you came across and how did you go about solving them?
So that estate is one of the oldest that we own. We've continuously owned it. It was first let in 1913. And our big challenges were making it fit for purpose for the future. And we showed you 4 of the blocks, which we have completely remodeled because when they were built, they were tiny, tiny homes and they had bathrooms inside the kitchen. Just not suitable for today's modern living. Yeah. So we had to totally remodel those 4 blocks. It's a big estate, however. We've got many, many blocks there, and we've got nearly 500 residents on that estate. So for putting up with the disruption around the 4 blocks we were remodeling, we decided that we would take the opportunity to reinvest in the whole estate as well. So in the blocks we haven't remodeled, we've put in new kitchens, new bathrooms, we've put in new windows and we're repairing roofs. So everybody is getting something on that estate. And that's the way we think because we think long term about the investment in our homes. We're not just thinking about the next electoral cycle, to be controversial, which is what politicians tend to think of. And it's the policy environment that we operate within.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when we were going around, we were talking about the fact that you had to kind of reduce maybe the amount of units you had, but in order to provide better facilities for those that are there, so you lifts, making flats, I guess, a bit more spacious for people. That's a conscious decision? I mean,
yes, I mean making flats accessible. In 1913 that wasn't the top priority, and of course today it is. People in social housing present with a range of vulnerabilities. The people that we're housing at tend to be older. And on that estate in particular, it's in the middle of London. Providing accessible family accommodation is so highly needed.
Yeah. And I think from a sustainable perspective, you've done a lot of work on, say, ground source heat. So maybe if we could touch on that slightly as to like the things that you've done there differently to us.
So for the blocks that we remodeled, we took the opportunity to think ahead. And we have put in ground source heat pumps, as you say. We've bored down into the ground, quite a challenge in central London. I mean, we had a range of experts who worked with us, and in particular, I'd have to mention Kensa, who did all the technical feasibility studies around it all, and we're a great partner to work with. So our 4 remodel blocks, which provide 80 homes, are now all net zero carbon ready. individual heating units within the flats, which are small enough that they fit within a cupboard. And what is really interesting about this is the oldest homes that we have tried to retrofit. It's been much easier on some of our more rural homes, which are traditionally built and not as old, to fit new technology into them. So this really was groundbreaking work, and we've learned a lot as a result of that, and hopefully a lot that we can apply to the rest of our estate as well.
Yeah, great. And individual metering, I think, which is quite important
Absolutely.
for a lot of
Yes.
residents.
Yeah.
Actually, a question for me on logistics is a living, breathing estate with families, many of which have lived there for many years. So how did you manage the logistics? Because obviously a lot of that stuff you have to do inside the houses. So how did that work?
So we work very closely with our residents, and this is a project that has been many years in the making. And much of that has been about taking the residents on the journey with us. The 4 blocks that we remodelled are situated on part of the site that we were able to isolate. Right. So that really helped. But there's no doubt that our residents have been putting up with a lot of disruption, dust, noise, etc. So it was so important for us that everybody was getting something out of this project.
Okay. Thank you, Claire. Paul, if we come to you, I guess Claire's talked about some of the broader challenges that housing associations face. When you think about the broader sector and how they're facing off to sustainability, how does that compare, and what are the other things we need to think about?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think the things that Claire and the team at Clarion are doing are fantastic and really tackling some of the trickier assets, as you said, to learn. And I think the sector's pretty good at sharing some of those learnings as well. It's clear to me that, there are a couple of things on people's mind. One is around EPCC by 2030, which is kind of very imminent and gets a lot more focus. And I think there are varying degrees as to how advanced people are, or housing associations various are with their thinking about what's next. Yeah. How much will it cost? How will we do it? So it does feel that we're at the start and some are going faster than others. And there does sometimes tend to be a nervousness about first mover. If I go first and if I do it this way, what if in 5 years' time I just look silly because now it's cheaper or different ways to do it? So I think there are challenges around that. And I think the big challenge is also around just where we find ourselves at the moment. The challenges facing housing associations where so their costs have gone up, a period of inflation. Rent hasn't quite tracked that because of the rent settlement a couple of years ago. A big increase on spend on the existing portfolio, on existing homes. We're kind of seeing that, and some of that is standards, expectation, regulation have gone up, but also inflation. The costs have gone up. For some, fire safety, that's kind of a big cost for some. And then decarbonisation that kind of fits in there, which is still kind of uncertain about how will we do it? Sure. How much will it cost? What happens to the homes that you can't get to net zero? So there's still quite a lot of uncertainty. And I think the lever that can be pulled, and I think is pulled quite a lot, which is in some ways sad but understandable, is that when you have all of those pressures on your cash flows, you need to make choices. All the bits that I mentioned before, they're compulsory. You have to do them. And new build homes is one of the things that kind of suffers a little bit. Generally, we're seeing that kind of reduce across the sector, and which is a natural kind of consequence of those pressures. So it's on the agenda all the time. We speak to our customers about it all the time. Yep. They're very focused on it. Where they are in the stage of understanding what needs to be done, how you can do it, what it will cost. I think there's variations. I think it would be fair to say.
Well, let's stick on that theme for a sec. So NatWest funding is obviously something we can do to support the sector, but maybe if you could touch on the ways we're thinking about funding and other things to support the sector from a sustainable perspective.
Yeah, sure. Look, our primary purpose is to provide funding to housing associations. They provide families that are, safe and warm, cheap to heat. It's the main thing. And we're kind of really pleased that we've recently been able to announce an increase in our ambition from 5 billion over 24 to 26 to 7.5 billion. Some of that's just because we had some great success last year where we lent about 4.1 billion to the sector. So the primary focus is provide the funding that helps the housing associations do what they they need to do. Actually, within that 4.1 billion last year, we also undertook we did some pilot retrofit loans, so some loans that were specifically to fund retrofit works, which was just over 100 million across 3 loans. So we've learned from that. The main incentive in there was that it was a discounted margin, so a cheaper cost, which kind of the idea, hopefully, that will encourage housing associations that are planning to retrofit to maybe do a bit more than they were going to do, or maybe do it a bit quicker than they were going to do. And so we're just working on the next stage of that and the permanent kind of retrofit solution. So we're excited about that, and we should have some out on that over the coming month or two. The other bit that we have been working on is with Place for People, so kind of a large housing association and Pineapple, Centrica, British Gas, around a mass scale retrofit project. How can you, in a particular location, retrofit at scale to get benefits from that? And then also, how can you, in some way, use the savings that are achieved via lower energy bills? How could you maybe use those to help fund the retrofit cost and bring that down, because it can be substantial? And I think the final thing is just we talked about discussions on sustainability, net zero are on our agendas. We're doing a bit more now to just understand the degrees of preparedness and thoughts on sustainability and retrofit, and gather information. So we're really informed about that. And I think at some point we'll start to use that to inform how we lend. And so I think there are a number of things that funders can do, but I think funding is a vital part of what we do. But I've no doubt that it's not one of the big obstacles in my view anyway. It's there. The bigger challenges are kind of actually how you undertake this.
Absolutely. I mean, I totally agree. But I mean, Paul's point there about, funding being available, I think is a really good one. The challenge for most housing associations, of course, is how do we pay for the funding? And at the moment, our residents are enjoying the benefits through lower energy bills from the work that we're doing. And what we need to do is move to a situation where either we can get an income stream that will support additional borrowing, or we share in the upside of doing the works. And I think some innovation and clever thinking is required to get us to that point.
Absolutely. And it feels like sharing that across the sector as well is really important, because it's a sector-wide problem, isn't it? So I guess thinking about what Paul said, is there anything differently that you'd like to see from funders?
So I think, what Paul mentioned, funders getting engaged with our business, understanding the challenges that we are facing. There was a very kind of high level top summary of the financial challenges that the sector faces at the moment. We're all in a slightly different position, but Paul's summary was pretty accurate. It's a tough time for a lot of housing associations at the moment. And of course, we want to be thinking long term. We want to be investing in our assets. But some of us have particular challenges. And I would say, those who operate in London in particular, because it's a lot of high-rise buildings, are finding that the building safety challenge is quite extreme for some providers. And you always have to balance things as a housing association. You balance the amount of investment you can put in your new homes, which is largely dictated by the rental income that we have, against the appetite to build new. And of course, building new is the answer to many of the problems that we have in our existing stock of overcrowding and maybe, conditions that are not ideal for today. But building new requires debt, and debt needs servicing. And that, of course, is the challenge.
It's a fine balance. It's almost like you've seen my next question as well. So I think if I bring us back to or into the future, so I think when you're building your new stock, you're very focused on sustainability. Last year, I think you did 50% had solar panels, for example. You're experimenting in Essex and Hertfordshire. What else can you do to help drive continuous improvement with your new build stock?
So I think for us, it's about testing new technology at the moment. That is the primary thing that we've been trying to do. We've done some experimental work in Hertfordshire around future home standards. Have built a series of bungalows, each of which are slightly different. We have monitoring equipment in them, and our residents are working with us so that we can test out which technologies work best. And that then gives us the basis on which to invest in the future. We've also done some really interesting work with Octopus Energy and with Hill Group. To some extent, building new is easier than where we started, talking about, homes that were built 100 years ago and trying to retrofit new technology into them. That is much more challenging and at the moment much more expensive. Yeah. Building new, by and large, you have the freedom to be able to choose which technologies you are going to test out. And the Octopus Energy work is really interesting because if homes in the future are able to produce more energy than the household needs, then that might result in the household not having bills that they currently have today. So testing that out for our residents is really important.
And that net zero bill homes are a bit of a gold standard, aren't they?
Oh, well, that would be transformative. But, we have some very poor households, and not having that energy bill, to have to pay would really transform the household finances of many of our residents.
Absolutely. And it's in...
I guess I think there's a point also about, because we talk about cheaper energy and using technology to deliver that, and often people can think, oh, that's great, that means the family that lives there has got that extra amount of money. But often that saving or making it cheaper will probably mean they can actually heat the house rather than save the money. So I remember I went to one of my first funders days with Claire and the team at Clarion when I joined the sector, and I think there was a slide and it was about the average household income across your business, and it was something like £11,000 or so. And I was I was shocked, really. I should have known that, but I didn't. But it's just, if you think about some of the challenges that families kind of face, and the Clare and the team try and support, and all the other housing associations, it is a real challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. And the testing is really important, because you can have a technology that should work well, but actually if it's not used in the way it was necessarily intended in real life, then you don't have the effect.
It's a big education process as well when we put technology into homes. To get the most out of it, our residents need to be able to use it. Yeah. And, some of these things are not always that intuitive.
Right. Yes, no, absolutely. So, Paul, you cover both the private residential and housing association sectors. So just thinking about some of the challenges Claire was talking about and you were talking about across housing associations, is there anything that the private sector can bring in or the two sectors can learn from each other?
I think, so ultimately at its heart, they are homes for families, be they apartments or houses, and kind of built at various kind of times. I think we've certainly seen in the private sector some of the house builders doing a similar thing around. So Taylor Wimpey have got one out in Sudbury, kind of where they built a number of different homes, testing kind of, and we'll be kind of gathering and learning information from that. The private sector faces the same challenge, as Claire alluded to, is that they're responsible for all the capex, but actually don't get any benefit from the savings as it currently stands. I think that's something that kind of needs to be looked at. But broadly, it's the same. Probably in the private sector, I would say the average private rental sector, probably the average age of the stock is probably a bit newer. I would imagine, and certainly in our sort of loan book probably is, because that's kind of the way that our appetite kind of moves us on. But yeah, similar challenges. But when you get down into, it's interesting, when you get down into the private buy-to-let landlord, who owns an apartment or a flat that they let, I'm not quite sure. We're trying to do a lot to educate on that, about what needs to happen and support. And one would hope that what we will see is the lessons that we learn, the technologies we understand through the work that Claire and the team are doing, and other kind of sort of the national house builders, etc., can really inform and help us then be a conduit through to that kind of group of smaller buy-to-let landlords, which is a shrinking group.
Yeah, absolutely. Claire, if I could bring you back to your Making the Difference report. So I think it was clear to me that social purpose forms a big part of that. So I'd just like to hear from you on what social purpose means for you, and I guess the big things that you and Clarion are doing to deliver that 03 to 2050.
Okay, so it's part of our DNA, and is the lifeblood of the organisation to make a difference for the families that we house. So for many years we've had a social value programme running, and it has been predominantly about providing money and opportunity for our residents to be able to live in a home, put down roots in a community, and to be able to better their standard of living. So our key priorities are to provide routes into work or training for anyone who lives in a Clarion home. If they wish to get into work, we will provide them with a route and the support to enable them to do that. There's benefit for the household, obviously, in being in work and having income. There's also benefit from the landlord because they are more able to pay their rent. Yep. So that's a big priority. Second priority is around investment in communities. Mm-hmm. So we work in communities across the country, and we invest in things like after-school clubs, in adventure playgrounds, in all sorts of things. And we talk to our residents about what's needed in the place where they live, and we try and provide seed corn funding for that. And then finally, we provide a series of small grants for lots of agencies who work in our communities, who work with our residents, and that provides benefit for the community as a whole. And we've been doing that for many years. We provide about £10 million of our own money every year, and our team boost that money by looking for partnerships, looking for other funders who are also interested in doing things, and it has been hugely successful. And the social value that we get from that, we measure every year, and it's enormous, the difference that it makes.
So correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's £1 billion over the last decade. You're targeting £3 billion
we are.
For 2050.
Very good.
So all of these small things do add up to numbers, which is great.
Yeah.
So
I think there is something on that as well around. So Clarion Futures, anyone doesn't need to kind of look at the work that they do. I think housing associations up and down the country in some ways have stepped in to do some of the things in communities that would normally be the remit of local authorities and councils, and that's purely because their budgets are so tight, etc., etc. So I think the work that's done is fantastic. I've got a real concern that as budgets in housing associations are tighter, there are decisions that are made that maybe lose some of those bits, which would be a real shame. But I think the stuff which leads me on to the other point around. I say this, we've had this conversation before, and say I really don't understand why housing associations don't have better PR, because the things that they do, that for communities that they operate in are fantastic, and you only ever read about them when something goes wrong. So I just kind of wish that people would understand what they do and the value they bring to communities much more. So.
No, absolutely. I mean, maybe we could just touch on there, I guess, the challenge you have around some bringing homeless into your portfolio and the grant split. Maybe if we could go into that a bit, Claire.
Okay, so the funding arrangements for housing associations over many years have remained the same. We rely upon government grant to support the capital build of building new homes. Until relatively recently, rented homes were let on social rents. And those are the lowest discounted rents. The homes you saw in central London are probably at a discount of about, there'll be 30% of the equivalent market rate. Yeah. So they are heavily, heavily discounted. And it is government grant that enables us to deliver those things. Grant over the last few years has reduced significantly, and so we've been building more affordable rented homes. Affordable rented homes are at a lesser discount. So in London, typically a discount of 60%. Yeah. So they're more expensive for the residents to live in, but they're economically all that we can deliver with reduced levels of grant. If we were to move to a situation in the future where more social rented homes were built, then we would need an uptick in the grant, a substantial uptick in the grant. To give you an idea, our grant rates are currently about 12% of the capital build of a home. They would need to be much more like 80% if we were to deliver social rents.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Paul. That's been Property Perspectives for another episode. Please, if you like the episode, click like and subscribe.